The U.S. continues to just blow up boats that are in international waters in the Caribbean. And every time they blow one up, or at least every time they want to tell us about it, they post pictures of the boat exploding. Can't see anything other than the boat exploding. You don't know who's on the boat. You don't know what they have on the boat. You don't know where it's going or what purpose it has. You know what we're told about it after they blow it up. It reminds me a lot of when Obama used to drone whoever he wanted in Pakistan or Yemen or Somalia or Afghanistan. They would just blow people up. And then John Brennan would issue a press release, the CIA director, saying, oh, we just killed 14 more militants or more terrorists. And there'd be Reuters headlines saying, U.S. kills 14 Al-Qaeda militants, government says, or Brennan says, or CIA says. And they would just mindlessly recite what the government said about these people, even though, as the Obama administration themselves admitted, usually they didn't know the names of anyone that they were blowing up, or most of the people they were blowing up. They would just blow them up. They had no idea who they even were, let alone that they were terrorists or militants. And they would just say afterwards, oh yeah, we blew up terrorists. And everybody would say, oh yeah, good, that's great, we blew up terrorists. No due process, no evidence, nothing. Just Obama asserting the right to go around the world, killing whoever he wants, not in war zones, not with authorization of Congress. And that's exactly what's happening now. Here is Pete Hegseth, the newly named Secretary of War, which I think is much more accurate name than Secretary of Defense. On October 19th, he posted this to his X account. On October 17th, at the direction of President Trump, the Department of War conducted a lethal kinetic strike on a vessel affiliated with the ELN, a designated terrorist organization that was operating in the U.S. Southcom area of responsibility. The vessel was known by our intelligence to be involved in illicit narcotic smuggling, was traveling along a known narco trafficking route, and was transporting substantial amounts of narcotics. There were 3 male narco terrorists aboard the vessel during the strike, which was conducted in international waters. All 3 terrorists were killed and no U.S. forces were harmed in the strike. By the way, Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, continues to be one of the very few people who steadfastly objected to Trump's, the Obama policy of just going around the world killing people and claiming afterwards that they were terrorists with no evidence. He objected to that. Many years I was doing reporting on that all the time, and Ron Paul was always there denouncing it, and now he's denouncing President Trump's program policy based on exactly the same rationale, because the policies are identical. They use the same legal frameworks. They're both based on the war on terror. Trump, that's why Pete Hegseth calls them narco-terrorists. And in order to justify just killing them without any evidence presented or anything like that. By the way, we have Rand Paul's interview from Fox News where he explained this just in the last couple of days. Can we pull that up, please? I've neglected to mention that, but I'd like to show that. We can just show it right from the computer. No, I know, you can just pull it up. It's like right on Twitter. I just want to show you what Rand Paul is saying, because Donald Trump attacked Rand Paul just like he's been attacking Thomas Massie quite viciously. Here's what Trump said on Truth Social. Now, this was about an attack where the families of the people killed insist that they were fishermen. I'm not saying you should blindly believe that, but they insisted that. And there's no more reason to disbelieve or believe them than to believe the government of the United States, which has a long history of lying when they kill people. Here's what Trump said on September 15th, quote, "This morning on my orders, the U.S. military forces conducted a second kinetic strike against positively identified, extraordinarily violent drug trafficking cartels and narco-terrorists in the Southcom area of responsibility. The strike occurred while these confirmed narco-terrorists were from Venezuela were in international waters transporting illegal narcotics, a deadly weapon poisoning Americans, headed to the U.S. These extremely violent drug trafficking cartels pose a threat to U.S. national security, foreign policy, and vital U.S. interests. The strike resulted in 3 male terrorists killed in action. No U.S. forces were harmed in the strike. Be warned, if you are transporting drugs that can kill Americans, we are hunting you. The illicit activities by these cartels have wrought devastating consequences for American communities for decades, killing millions of American citizens. No longer. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Now, and here's the video Trump posted. And you'll see here, because there were a couple of, I believe, survivors, you'll see how the boat is just sort of adrift here in this video. You see it just, it's not really speeding anywhere. It's just kind of, it almost looks stalled. Like it's kind of just floating on the waves that are carrying it. There you see the boat just looks, it really looks in neutral. And here you see the radar focused on it. And there it's on the Twitter feed. You can find the Rand Paul interview. It's on Fox. And there you see it just blown up. And now the whole boat is on fire. I mean, it really, obviously, exposed the whole thing. So I would think that if you're against regime change, if you don't want the U.S. to keep spending money on military actions in other countries, on bombs, that at some point you would say, wait, you keep claiming these are like narco-terrorists, incredibly violent narco-terrorists. Like, how do you know that? Where's the evidence for that? And if there's all these drugs entering the United States and killing Venezuela, why did your own government, both the first administration and the second administration, the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration, produce countless reports on the origins of fentanyl coming to the United States, claiming that this was China and Mexico, never even mentioning Venezuela? And why did the broader ones about drugs in general entering the United States barely attribute any of that to Venezuela at all? When did this happen? When suddenly did we need to now change the government of Venezuela because all the drugs are coming from Venezuela? Since when? That was never claimed before. The president of Colombia is Gustavo Petro. He's on the left. He's a critic of American imperialism and interference in his region, like a lot of Latin American leaders are. And at least one of the people attacked there was Colombian, and the boat itself was not Venezuelan, but Colombian, according to him. This was him talking about the video where the boat was adrift, and that's the boat that the Trump administration just proudly blew up. And here's what President Petro said about it. Quote, "The boat attacked on September 16th was Colombian, had an engine on top as a sign of damage, and was turned off. Presumably it was in Colombia waters. And who was there was a lifelong fisherman, Alejandro Carranza, who has not returned to his home. Alert to the Attorney General of the nation. I request that you act immediately, grant immediate protection to the victim families, and associate them, if they wish, with the victims of Trinidad and Tobago to initiate legal actions in the world and in the justice system of the United States." Now, you look at that video, there's no question what he said there about the boat is true. I don't know if the boat was disabled, I don't know if the engine was injured, but they were clearly installed. The boat was not headed anywhere. It was not speeding anywhere. And he claimed that it was a fisherman. Now, I'm not saying you should believe the government of Colombia and the claims it makes. The family has come out and said the same. I'm not saying you should believe them blindly either. But it's certainly evidence to weigh against the Trump administration's continuous claims presented with zero evidence. Zero. Here's what Donald Trump responded. This was yesterday on Truth Social in response to President Petro's statement. Quote, "President Gustavo Petro of Colombia is an illegal drug leader, strongly encouraging the massive production of drugs in big and small fields all over Colombia." Now, I should just say here that it's only in the last couple of years that the left has been able to win elections in Colombia. Before that, it was a right-wing government for the longest time in Colombia. They were very close U.S. allies. The U.S. had a base in Colombia. We helped Colombia fight FARC and other drug gangs for years and years and years. Massive military force. We've been fighting the war on drugs with our military for decades, since Richard Nixon. And I've asked this question once before, but have you ever heard anyone in the United States who wants drugs complain that they can't get it? I haven't. It's a total failure, the war on drugs. You cannot eliminate or fight drugs through blowing up boats. And it's not the goal. Trump goes on. And so this idea that President Petro has been in power for like 6 seconds is a big drug leader, a legal drug leader, because he's the president of Colombia, a country that does actually, unlike Venezuela, export a lot of drugs, is laughable. Colombia has always been this, including when the U.S. controlled its puppet government. Trump goes on, quote, "It has become the biggest business in Colombia by far, and Petro does nothing to stop it, despite large-scale payments and subsidies from the USA that are nothing more than a long-term ripoff of America. As of today, these payments or the other form of payment or subsidies will no longer be made to Colombia. The purpose of this drug production is the sale of massive amounts of product into the United States, causing death, destruction, and havoc. Petro, a low-rated and very unpopular leader with a fresh mouth toward America, better close up these killing fields immediately, or the United States will close them up for him, and it won't be done nicely." So I guess we're threatening to bomb Colombia now or invade Colombia as well. Again, Colombia has been producing, I mean, does anyone not know this? Like all the lore about Colombian drug gangs? There's, miniseries and films about it, and notorious and mythological Colombian drug leaders. This is not something that just happened in the last year or two. And the United States has been trying to bomb the drug industry out of Colombia for decades. How has that worked? So you have a president who came in campaigning to only focus on the promise, on the forgotten man, America first, the communities that are falling apart in the United States, the deindustrialized parts of the United States. No more money on wars and endless war and military and bombing and regime change. And he spent a month on the Middle East and Israel and Hamas and Gaza, threatening Hamas, engineering a ceasefire that I hope remains, but over the weekend already, Israel ignored it, claiming Hamas violated it like you knew Israel would. We're going to get to that tomorrow. Bombing 100 different sites, killing dozens of people in Gaza during this ceasefire. Cutting off aid, they're back to saying they're going to adhere to the ceasefire for now. And now you have them focused on who's going to lead Venezuela and who's going to lead Colombia and threatening Cuba. I mean, America is last oftentimes. From Reuters today, the obvious response, Colombia recalls U.S. ambassador after Trump's tariff threat, drug remarks. So let me just make sure I understand this. We give money, and have given money to Colombia every year to help them fight their drug gangs and their drug traffickers. And Colombia, as I said, is an actual major source of drugs that head into the United States, cocaine and other drugs like it. We don't want to spend that money anymore to help Colombia fight drugs. We want to save that money. So no more money to Colombia to fight drugs. But we're going to pay for a massive regime change operation in Venezuela. Huge amounts of military assets deployed to the Caribbean to menace Venezuela. Massive bombing campaigns, monitoring and surveilling their shipping, bombing their boats. A CIA covert operation that Trump has authorized to act inside Venezuela. Do you know how expensive that is? And then if we do end up deposing Maduro, as is the goal, do you know how armed Venezuela is? You think Venezuelans are just going to meekly allow Maduro to be deposed and to have a U.S. puppet installed that we control? Who's already calling Netanyahu and promising her support for Israel? Who's already saying that if you get me into power, Cuba and other left-wing regimes in the region will fall? There's going to be immense amounts of instability and civil conflict, at best inside Venezuela, let alone the destabilization of the region, the outflux of immigrants to neighboring countries. The United States is going to be responsible for all that. We're going to pour huge amounts of money into fortifying this new government in Venezuela and dealing with all the instability that it engenders. I saw, we'll get to this in a second, but there were a couple people who survived on one of these boats, and instead of picking them up, these dangerous narco-terrorists, these violent, incredibly violent drug gangs members, as Trump and Hegseth are claiming, we didn't pick them up and put them in prison as you think we would. We just sent them back to their home countries. Neither of them were Venezuelan. They were Colombian and Trinidadian. And that's not obviously something you would do if they were actually incredibly violent narco-terrorists who have drowned killed Americans with drugs. You would, at the very best, put them in a prison. You would put them on trial and put them in a prison. Show evidence of their guilt and put them in prison. And that's not what Trump did. And I heard Trump supporters over the weekend saying, oh, well, why should we spend the money to imprison them? It's like, what? You don't think anymore that we should imprison incredibly violent drug terrorists because we want to save the money. We should just send them back to their home country to let these incredibly violent drug terrorists continue to engage in drug terrorism, narco-terrorism. So it's not worth it to imprison violent drug terrorists, but it's worth it to spend thousands and thousands of times more on regime change in Venezuela, on a massive military operation to blow up boats. That makes no sense, obviously. Now, as I mentioned, Rand Paul is one of the very few people in Washington in general who stands on principle. Thomas Massie is another. I don't think it's coincidental that the two members of the Republican Party that Trump is trying most to vilify and remove from Congress are Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, two Republicans from Kentucky. And Rand Paul went on Fox and he made all the arguments. I remember on Meet the Press. He went on Meet the Press with Kristen Walker, and she asked him about this policy of blowing up boats off the coast of Venezuela. And Rand Paul said all the things I remember him saying about his opposition to the Obama policy that was very similar. And I know because I was saying the same things back then. I'm saying the same things now. So I recognize someone's consistent advocacy on this. And Rand Paul is one of the very few people being consistent. Here's what he said on Meet the Press.
Venezuela, obviously, you've been very focused on this. President Trump has authorized military strikes against suspected drug boats in the Caribbean. As you know, so far, more than 20 people, Senator, have been killed in 6 different strikes. Do you believe that these strikes against these suspected drug boats are legal?
No, they go against all of our tradition. You know, when you kill someone, you should know if you're not at war, not in a declared war, you really need to know someone's name at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all of these people have been blown up without us knowing their name, without any evidence of a crime. And for decades, if not centuries, when you stop people at sea in international waters or in your own waters, you announce that you're going to board the ship and you're looking for contraband, smuggling, or drugs. This happens every day off of Miami, but we know from Coast Guard statistics that about 25% of the time the Coast Guard boards a ship, there are no drugs. So if our policy now is to blow up every ship we suspect or accuse of drug running, that would be a bizarre world in which 25% of the people might be innocent. The other thing about these speedboats is they're 2,000 miles away from us. If they have drugs, they're probably peddling drugs to one of the islands of Trinidad or Tobago off of Venezuela. The idea that they're coming here is like, it's a huge assumption, and really shouldn't you have to present some proof? It is the difference between war and peace. In war, though, you don't ask people's name. But if they want all-out war where we kill anybody and everybody that is in the country of Venezuela or coming out, that has to have a declaration of war. It's something that is not pretty, very expensive, and I'm not in favor of declaring war on Venezuela, but the Congress should vote. The president shouldn't do this by himself.
I mean, that is so basic. I mean, if these people are really drug traffickers, why don't we spend 1/10,000th of what we would spend and just do normal Coast Guard interdictions and pick these people up and put them in life in prison, which is what you do with international drug traffickers if you actually have evidence that convicts them of guilt in a court. You're going to go around murdering people because they're in a boat without any idea who you're even killing, and then afterwards have Pete Hexas go, "We got those narco-terrorists," and a bunch of MAGA people are going to be like, "Yeah, the bad guys." I mean, this is insanity. This is what leads to every dumb American war. Exactly this mentality, this leader worship, this just willingness to believe whatever is fed to people. And, kudos to Rand Paul, since he knows that anybody in the Republican Party in Congress who stands up and criticizes a single thing Donald Trump does is going to have the wrath of not just Trump, but his billionaire AIPAC funders come crashing down on them. That's who's funding Tom Massie's, the campaign against Tom Massie are 3 extremely pro-Israel billionaires, including Mary Madelson. And they'll do that to anybody that Trump wants. Rand Paul has never been a really steadfast supporter of Israel. And he can't help but notice that those are the people that Trump keeps targeting for removal. And maybe it's because he's also mad at them because they occasionally object, such as when Trump is following a neoconservative policy long advocated by people like Marco Rubio and those other neocons in Washington, and people like Tom Massey, or at least Rand Paul, took seriously the idea that neoconservatism would not govern our foreign policy anymore. And so they say, hey, I think I'm against this based on arguments they've long made, including about Obama. Now, as we mentioned, there were 2 survivors of the explosion of these ships, which is amazing. I mean, the U.S. government has the first ever $1 trillion a year military budget. We're trying to blow up these boats, little speedboats, but somehow 2 people on them survived. Now, if you believe everything Pete Hegseth has been saying, or Donald Trump has been saying, or J.D. Vance has been saying, all the people on these boats that we're blowing up are incredibly violent drug traffickers. And I wanted to say also about this Rand Paul clip, by the way. I remembered this today when I actually was watching something that we did. I was looking for something, and I remembered this. After the first boat was exploded, Marco Rubio was the one who came out and announced it. And he gave a press conference, and they said, where was this boat going? And Marco Rubio said, we believe it was taking drugs to Trinidad. Exactly what Rand Paul just said. These are small boats. They're thousands of miles away from the U.S. shores. It's unlikely they're coming to the U.S. They're probably, there's drug demand in a lot of other places besides the United States, including in the Caribbean. And he said they're probably taking it to the Caribbean. And Marco Rubio said, when asked, that the first boat we blew up was headed to Trinidad. The next day, though, Trump came out and said, we blew up this boat because it was headed to the United States with drugs. And then Marco Rubio changed his story and started saying it was headed to the U.S. This is the kind of thing that ought to really provoke your skepticism, no matter how much you hate Maduro or commies or whatever is in your mind about why we need to do another war, another regime change war. You shouldn't want to be lied to by the government or lured into another war based on claims that aren't the real motives. Now, as I said, there were 2 survivors of one of the boats that we just blew up. And if Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio were telling the truth, and these are dangerous narco-terrorists, incredibly violent, you would obviously want to put them in prison. After all, they probably have blood of Americans on their hands. That's not what the U.S. decided to do. Here from the Washington Post over the weekend, the U.S. is repatriating the survivors of an alleged drug boat strike back to Colombia and Ecuador. Quote, the United States is repatriating 2 alleged drug traffickers to Colombia and Ecuador after military forces attacked their vessel in the Caribbean Sea on Thursday. It is yet unclear if the multinational crew of alleged drug traffickers has ties to Venezuelan criminals or terrorism groups, but the release of 2 detained suspects further undermines the administration's justifications and suggests the crew was released to avoid extended legal scrutiny, experts said. Colombian and Ecuadorian drug runners are focused on cocaine, experts say, while the vast majority of fentanyl bound for the U.S. is trafficked through Mexico. Right, think about what would have happened if they hadn't released them. If they picked them up, what would you have to do with them? You'd have to charge them with crimes and bring them to an American court. Charge them with crimes, give them due process, present evidence of their guilt, present evidence that these things that are being said about them really are true. And then if you're telling the truth and you have the evidence, they would go to prison. We did that with Manuel Noriega in the 1980s. He used to be our ally. He was the head of Panama, the president of Panama. We decided we didn't like him anymore. He wasn't really doing what we told him to do anymore. So we charged him with drug trafficking, invaded Panama, killed thousands of Panamanians, brought him back to Miami, Noriega, charged him with drug trafficking, convicted him of court, and he got life in prison. Why, if these people are dangerous drug traffickers and narco-terrorists, are you releasing them back to Colombia and Ecuador instead of putting them in prison? The only reason is because they're not actually narco-terrorists and you can't prove in a court they're guilty. And you're scared of what will happen if you have to. Here was Trump on Truth Social. Quote, it was my great honor to destroy a very large drug-carrying submarine that was navigating toward the United States on a well-known narco-trafficking transit route. U.S. intelligence, remember when MAGA disbelieved U.S. intelligence? U.S. intelligence confirmed this vessel was loaded up mostly with fentanyl and other illegal narcotics. There were 4 known narco-terrorists on board the boat. 2 of the terrorists were killed. This is the one where there were 2 survivors. At least 25,000 Americans would die if I allowed the submarine to come ashore. Okay, somebody tell me. And then he says the 2 surviving terrorists are being returned to their countries of origin, Ecuador and Colombia. for detention and prosecution. Yeah, you sure about that? Because the president of Colombia doesn't sound like he's ready to detain and prosecute them. In fact, he said they were fishermen. And if it's true that the president of Colombia, President Petro, is this illegal drug trafficker, why would you trust sending a drug terrorist back to Colombia and have him prosecute them? You're saying that President Petro is the leader of these drug gangs. They don't have any interest in stopping them. None of this makes any sense unless you understand that the real goal is to destabilize Venezuela and do regime change in Venezuela and dominate the region again. And the amount of people who are just overnight, I saw people walking around today saying, oh, we have to blow up these boats because they have fentanyl in them. That's what Trump said here too. Trump's own government has produced report after report after report after report that makes clear Venezuela has nothing to do with the fentanyl trade. Trump's campaign promise was to bomb the drug cartels of Mexico, not Venezuela, on the grounds that the Mexicans are the ones importing fentanyl and killing Americans. But then you wake up one day, Marco Rubio convinces you to go fix the government, fix Venezuela, where his family, the region his family comes from, has a lot of interest in still, as does Rubio. And you decide, okay, let's go get Venezuela. You wanted to do that in the first Trump administration as well, but John Bolton promised you it would be easy, and it wasn't, which is why you got rid of him. What do you have to do? Now, suddenly you have a new country, you want a regime change, and you have to convince people, especially your followers, to support it. So what do? You're like, hey, that country is bringing fentanyl into the United States and killing Americans. And you would think people would think critically would say, what? You never said that before. Since when? Since when is Venezuela bringing fentanyl in? Or even since when is Venezuela the main source of cocaine? But he knows people aren't going to think critically. He knows that if you tell enough people, we're blowing up bad guys, we're blowing up the terrorists, the brown narco terrorists, the traffickers, the kingpins, they're killing Americans. That lizard brain kicks in and people start cheering for every time they see a boat blowing up. They feel strong and powerful, like, yeah, we got those terrorists. I've watched this for 25 years. And well, back into the Cold War, same thing. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, communism didn't work anymore. Now it's the terrorist. It has to be the terrorist. The terrorist is justified all manner of lies and invasions and wars and bombings and erosion of civil liberties. It's amazing that it doesn't end. Everybody watches these tactics, watches them get dismantled and deconstructed and exposed. Said they don't want more wars, says they don't want more regime change, they want to spend the money here at home. The minute the government says, look over there, more bad guys, we have to go kill way too many people, not all by any means, but way too many, just start cheering, like feeling like a purpose to blowing people up, even though I have no idea who these people are, as Rand Paul said. And I confess that maybe there was some kind of desire shaping my perception that after watching this for 25 years, people really were at an end of their willingness to tolerate these new regime change wars. But every time there's a new one presented, and you watch everybody either stand up and cheer, just kind of silently acquiesce, and you realize how powerful war propaganda is and how immediately it can just shift people's brain on a dime, and that's what's happening in the case of Venezuela. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.